Hi everyone.
Hello everyone.
And what we have for you today is healing the father wound. And this is a little different than how you'll find it elsewhere. So we hope you enjoy it. It's taken from an IPSA seminar, so it's quite high level in terms of its content. But if you can follow this, there's an awful lot within it that's practical. And just a quick shout out to Leighton, by the way. I'll mention him in the description too. Thanks, Leighton.
Yes, thank you, Leighton.
Cheers. Take care, everyone.
See
Bye
you
for now.
soon.
This is another one for the lads. And particularly as Leighton has asked about this on the Discord, and I promised him that we'd do something about it. But this isn't Leighton, this is a collective representation through which we could perhaps help Leighton, but it's the kind of thing that we help other young men with. So the spectral figure then is obviously the so-called archetype, and it's taken the form of a Stoic philosopher, because a lot of these young men at the moment who are suffering with a father wound refer to that through internet gurus, that Stoicism is some kind of ideal to aspire to, basically putting up with things. Jordan Peterson's pushed this, and so have many others as well. Whereas some aspects of Stoicism, as interpreted through internet gurus, is useful, it's important to understand, particularly the Roman emperor, who's always quoted, Marcus Aurelius, that he was the most powerful man in the world. He could afford the luxury of being stoic in philosophy because he had complete control over his environment, whereas the young men don't have any. And if you make such a person adopt the ideals of Stoicism, then there's a huge gulf between their inner fantasy about how things should be and what they can actually achieve in their life. But in this, we can say that the so-called archetype, the Platonic form of the masculine in general, as it configures into the father to represent back to this young man, his level of development and understanding will change if it's interacted with. In other words, that figure is only a representative of other things that can pass through it. Because it's spectral, light can pass through it. So what light will be allowed to pass through and what light will be received from the Platonic field? The state that we were in will determine what we first experience. That's a principle in Tantric Buddhism, but it's also something you find naturally in depth psychology. So this young man with his game controller, who is facing away from the outside world, which is in darkness to him, it's unconscious, whilst he's playing his video games, can only access that which is suggested to him. So it will appear as a deep structure complex, first of all. And then how will that change if he interacts with it? Then the middle figure is supposed to be the stepfather, for many young men, an irreconcilable version of the masculine who is not their biological father and may be hostile and aggressive towards them openly, or just separated from them and therefore not working the proper father role for them on the inside. The biological father is represented by the figure on the right at some distance, hands in pockets, separated from access to his son for whatever reason. It might be because he is distant and always was. It may be because of marital or other relationship issues, but the young man has grown to the age that he is. He's not out in the world. He's in the world of fantasy and under the influence of internet gurus with an impossible ideal to become Marcus Aurelius, the philosopher, emperor of Rome, and Stoic icon, of simply putting up with things. And when somebody's on the floor, there might be an element of the necessity to do that, to adapt in a stoical way, but you have to become more of an active agent in the world to make changes. Because simply sitting and playing video games isn't going to help. Now, specifically with Leighton, because he's shared things openly on the Discord, you're all on the Discord and you will know about these things. He's posted something this morning as well. He's asking for help with this issue. He is building himself, and he's at a very sensitive stage where the wrong kind of influence could very easily reconfigure in his life. So the building of his ego is going to be very, very important. And what he's done recently is reveal where the likely fracture lines are configuring themselves through his complexes to anticipate the direction he's going to go in. And those fracture lines will open up and he could fall down between them into a chasm. And it's very difficult to be, or to not be baited into responding to the complex's intended trap. So as a microcosm, if you like, of the general approach that's necessary for young men like that, he has to be nurtured and strengthened in preparation for what he will have to do before he arrives there. So that means some encouragement in the immediate term, some preparation, because he's done this before, and you guys will know that he's been open about it. He gets misdirected by the complexes and falls into a prepared trap that's been projected ahead. So the idea of the stepfather and never knowing his real father, and the fact that he's been influenced by internet gurus and stoicism and plenty of other things, that's a kind of a configuration that would be of help to him to understand, provided his ego is strong enough. Because when we draw these things out into consciousness, they pass through the field of complexes, and in so doing, they take on libido, they take on the energy of the host individual who is suffering, deplete the ego of its autonomy, use the libido to give them autonomy, and then they all start. They're no longer simply images, they are active interference patterns in the life and experience of the ego. So it's not enough to simply make a representation. This is a representation. It's what we do with it. And if we're helping people as a coach or as a therapist, as a mentor, as a friend, it's as well to know how these things will naturally form themselves up. So the archetypal representation, because we take archetypes, all of them, as described by Jungians, to be images rather than things in and of themselves. Jung made that distinction, but I don't think he made it clearly enough, that these are representations and they change when we interact with them properly. Jungians fall down on one very basic error, and that is that the representations change because we find other iterations of them in all these different cultures and different times. That just encourages us to stay within level and laterally distribute rather than go through the image or allow the image to approach us and change. That's the tantric way of doing it. It's much, much more effective. So rather than simply generate more representations of the same fixed state of non-understanding, then Leighton will eventually have to be able to deal with the image in such a way that the image changes itself in relationship to him. It's no longer the Stoic philosopher, emperor of Rome, who had an unfortunate life. He suffered in many ways, and of course, if you're Stoical, you're supposed to accept suffering. That's a problem it has with Buddhism to some extent. The Buddhists, particularly if it's misunderstood, can accept suffering too readily rather than attempt to resolve it. A lot of Buddhists do attempt to resolve it, and they attempt to resolve it for other people as well. But those traps are there within Buddhism, just as they are within Christianity. The notion of suffering unnecessarily. If we suffer too much, we can't help anyone else because we become self-absorbed. And then we generate a fantasy about justifying that suffering. And that fantasy can be such that it co-opts a religion to the fantasy and justifies itself at a higher representational layer. It's as if QED, this is why I suffer, and this is why I must suffer. Well, while you're busy being narcissistic about suffering, you're not helping anybody else. And that can happen with these young men who take on board the suggestion of Stoicism.
So it would be tempting from the title there, Steve, who heals the wound, to think it's almost certainly going to be the archetype, but we've got the wrong archetype for that young man, potentially, of the Stoic philosopher.
Archetype as representation,
yes.
Image,
yes.
But it's really a deep structure complex.
Yes.
Which is the homeostatic aspect of what they call archetypes, attempting to represent themselves to say, this is what you've made of me, therefore this is how I appear. You can make something else of me and I'll appear to be different, but you have to engage with me. If you only laterally distribute, that's a fantasy, another fantasy, and another one, and you'll get nowhere. So in order to be free, you have to pass through that image. You have to convince the image that you're prepared to change. And that's the liberation that the Tantric Buddhism offers, if we can understand what it's trying to do. And that is absence in the West.
It is, yeah. Because the only relating, it appears anyway, in this representation of the masculine seems to be fantasy based. I mean, the suggestion is that it is fantasy based because the young man's playing a video game. So, you know, the relationship to the image is, even to the image, is not as it should be. And as you rightly say, he needs to get beyond that representation anyway. So in terms of who heals the wound, in terms of that lineup of men, you know, you could, as one possible response, say possibly none of them in terms of their representations. And you could also, because it's a projective medium, it might even be possible to suggest that the guy who is in the center, the stepfather, may actually be a representation of the father, and the other guy might be the stepfather. So some young men might actually reverse those images and read it differently.
That's absolutely fine. In order to make a statement and then move off from it, we have to have a starting point. So in that sense, that's why I said that the guy in the middle is the stepfather, because so many young men have a bad experience, and that's the one that stands proud, and the actual father they may or may not have even known is in the background. But easily they're all potentially interchangeable.
They are.
But if this were a different kind of medium, if this were a video and we were directing it and they were actors, it'd be easier to manipulate the dynamic to show some kind of progression. For example, suppose the young man put down his game controller and just orientated himself to his right and said, none of you are real. You're all complexes. None of you are real. Every one of you is an image that I've internalized and I've identified with. I choose not to identify with you. You're not even real. I open myself up to that which is healing within me, and I'm patient about being receptive to that. And when the ego can do that, it disidentifies with these multifarious representations that turn up. And it might be that we disidentify with a helpful one, but provided the attitude that we take is right in general towards the field of relationships, then something will step out from the background again. And we have to be disciplined about that, because what might step out might be the trickster, because we've challenged the representations, and the trickster may emerge and challenge us over whether we are genuine about our understanding of things. So when the trickster turns up, then we have to receive it and be very, very careful about that. We have to respect it, but we have to hold a position and know that even the trickster is not the final form of homeostasis. It's a mechanism of homeostasis in extended form. And then beyond the trickster, something else will emerge, or alongside with it, we might get the so-called anima if it's a young man rather than a young woman who's confronting something like this. But we have to be firm at that point and not suddenly say, oh, this is Carl Jung's ecology. We're in his territory. No, you're in his fantasies. As you've internalized them, you're still receiving deep structured complexes. When you can empty yourself of attachment, you can receive. That's a great paradox. Because what you receive then, although you're not attached to it, you nevertheless experience. But you experience a separation, but a relatedness too. If you receive things and identify with them, and just say there were three other figures there, they would all blend and merge and enter into him if this were a video rather than a still image. And what then? What do they do once they're inside him? Well, they would extend out, because they're not only what they appear to be. Some of them will be maladaptations and complexes in the psychophysiological sense. Some will manifest as behavior. in a psychosocial sense, because this is how it happens. They get inside our molecules, inside gene expression, inside the field of our whole being, because we let them in. So the task of keeping them at bay without a regressive or repressive or suppressive resistance, but at a sufficient distance where they can't attach but we can relate, that's the ideal. Then they're forced back on themselves. That's true of all complexes. How do we make a complex justify itself? Well, we have to separate from it, so it has only its own resources. Then everything that it says or does has to be in relationship to us and reveals how we have allowed ourselves to be dependent upon it. In other words, the complex could only say, I'm here because you need me. I'm here because I protect you. I'm here because I'm your symptoms. I'm here because I'm the image of your father. Are you anything that is not me? No, you're not. So if I decide not to be you, there's nothing for you. You cease to exist. But I still exist because I'm more than only you. And that's the ego position ultimately that needs to be taken. It's tough, but it's relatively smooth once you adopt that proper position towards things. Now, the downside of that is that we might start to misidentify the healing functions coming through as being merely complexes and disidentifying with them. That's what the trickster will do. It will attempt to test us and see if it can misdirect us. If it can't misdirect us, it has done its job. It's pressure tested us. The trickster will go away contentedly. But if it can misdirect us, it will try and make everything worse. Because how else can we be persuaded by homeostasis that we're doing something wrong other than forcing us to make more of the error progressively as we go along? It's like Milton Erickson's idea of providing a worst alternative. You're doing something wrong, well, let's make you do it's so well, it's so bad, it's so uncomfortable to you. That was Milton Erickson's intuition. Jay Haley picked up on it. But it's homeostatic. In a perverse kind of way, it's to say, well, if you're hurting yourself, hurt yourself some more till you get sick of it. And then we're in the world of Tantric Buddhism as well. So all of these different systems understand intuitively that for some people, some of the time, that's how it has to work. Now, as therapists, we shouldn't hurt people, but they are hurting themselves. And the progression of therapy will often reveal how that happens and what the dynamics of that are through representations and through complexes. So ego strength is all about identifying this kind of thing and building the necessary defenses against it. Martin, you got your hand raised, yeah?
Yeah, thank you. When you mentioned deep structure complexes here, and you also matched it with the Jungian approach of just laterally expanding when trying to understand that. So when we do that, basically, could we expect the deep structure complex to change in accordance with our hops, but on the same level? So we're not going behind them into the actual meta instincts, but we're just on surface level. So when we do those comparisons to other cultures and things, could we expect the images that are shown by the deep structure complexes, or actually the deep structure complexes, to match those ideas that we are approaching laterally? Is that how it would run?
Yes, thank you, Mladen. And that's where the conditioning effect operates. So whenever we do that, it's reinforced. It's reinforced because Jungians do it. It's part of the field of the Jungian opus, is to find associations in the culture and use them, download them to justify why the archetype of the whatever is in one culture and in another and in another and in another. And then you find them in your dreams and you find them elsewhere. It's all the same thing. But that means we're standing still, but going sideways. And the deep structure complexes will absorb this and reflect it back. And then it seems to be confirmed. What is within apparently is without. But we're not moving on. The only way we can then reduce tension is to agree with the lateral distribution. And the reason that the tension reduces but we make no progress is that we're feeding something that wants us to stand still. That's typical of a complex. That happens in OCD. When you agree with the OCD, it's unpleasant, but it's not as unpleasant as if you disagree with it. And in terms of acquiring lateral distribution of Jungian-based symbols, it operates in the same way. And the deep structure complex follows that and tries to catch up and say, see, you're still doing it. But what if you decided not to do that, and that your confrontation, as Jung himself called it, I believe wrongly, with the unconscious, is not an active confrontation, but it's a passive presence which challenges the representation to justify itself, to be removed by something else acting within the psyche because you're doing the right thing, or it's obliged to change because you are passively receptive but not identifying with it. The pressure then goes out of the ego and into the complex. And when we're not in an altered state of consciousness, what happens is that the pressure that the complex feels always ducks into the ego, and then it distributes into the body and into the behavior and in the environment. And we feel the anxiety, the drive pressure of that, because some of it belongs to the complex, some of it belongs to homeostasis, which is trying to say, for God's sake, change. Can't you see what you're doing to yourself? Stop, relax, look inwards with ego strength, and that which is pushing you for its purposes will be looking into a mirror which now reflects back upon itself, and then it will struggle. And the amount of energy, libido, if you like, that a complex can hold when it's ego identified is limited, because it's limited to the bandwidth that the ego can operate within at any one time. Now, if it's reduced in the present, what it will do is go back to the past, and it will try and manufacture representations of where our adaptations have failed in the past, because that's what's built the complex. And the person who's trying to resist the complex then feels suddenly an image appear of maladaptation and weakness. Now, quite clearly, that's the complex pushing representations into the ego. And the complex, in effect, is saying, see, this was you. This is why I exist. This is why I protect you. But it's also your weakness. That when you identify with that, you immediately justify my existence, and I'm back, I'm there, and I've got you. But if you're calm and relaxed, receptive but reflective back, then eventually the complex is going to get fatigued. And this is something that you can utilize as suggestion in hypnosis. If you're working with someone and these images are coming up interactively, you can introduce the suggestion that the complex will become fatigued by its effort. And it has no energy of its own. So everything that it does means that it's becoming more and more tired and unable to sustain itself. And then you introduce the notion which brings the meta instincts on board and say, in the background and all around, in the past, the present, and the future, is that field of health, homeostasis in other words, that will bring forward everything you need to heal yourself. That's a vague suggestion delivered through language patterning, but the vague suggestion will interact with what appears to be vague, that is to say, not yet fully represented, because the complex is in the way. And then it will bring it through. Homeostasis will say the ego is now ready to receive this. It can integrate it without this being misdirected by the complex into something else, because the ego is separating itself off from identification. So it can come through. So these are hints at how you can work with these processes in a focused way, without being distracted by internalized Jungian stuff, which then gets internally projected, utilized by complexes, fed back towards the ego and traps it. No one would want to be in therapy for 10 years by choice unless there was something actually wrong with them. I mean, seriously wrong with them. I don't just mean neurotic suffering. There's something so needy that they need that amount of attention, that no one would normally do that. Most people who suffer, they want the end to this. They want this sorting out. They don't want to indulge it. So if we follow natural means, natural processes, then we've reached a goal that the Jungians think takes 10 years, and it can be very, very quick once you bring that healing force online. So Martin, that's the process really of dealing with that, and in response to your question.
Yes, thank you. That was massively informative. Thank you.
Thanks, Martin.
Amazing, just amazing. And yeah, the way you said how you can suggest, even though it is vague, it will go past the complex, and even though it is vague, a person's homeostasis will know what the best thing for them to do, and it could, or it should constellate a path forward that can emerge, even though we have not suggested anything concrete. The content will emerge from the person so that we can receive and they can receive it going forward.
Yeah. Great point. And thank you for being so clear about that, because that is it. That's in summary what I was saying. And looking at this image now, we can animate that in our mind and give an illustration of what one of those stages might be like. So the young man shifts around in the chair, orientates himself towards them, and he's established his position of independence, and then he says what you've just said, insofar as that's what he's seeking, that which is behind them. What do they do? What might they do? They might start looking at one another and say, what do we do now? This does not compute, if you like, because the logic of the complex that is formed incrementally has been a predictive model of how the ego is likely to respond to the conditions under which these complexes formed. In other words, if they can't predict the ego, that it's them that will start to panic at that point. When I said about holding a mirror up to them so that they are reflected back to themselves, that's another Buddhist way of dealing with evil, for example, as they understand that to be, reflecting it back to its source. So the light that enters the mirror is always reflected back. Although we see an image continually forming in the mirror, it's continually being reflected back. It doesn't stay in the mirror. Only the fascination of looking into a mirror, either for a narcissist or for a complex, and complexes are narcissistic, only that fascination will bring about the collapse of perspective that is necessary for a complex to feel isolated. It is literally shown its own face at that point, and it doesn't see ours. That's important if the ego is to disidentify, but gradually then that they would be unable to sustain their form. So the absent father complex, if that's what it is, will dissipate. The stepfather would weaken and dissipate, but the Stoic philosopher is likely to change into something much more helpful. The thing to watch out for, as I say, is the trickster and potentially the so-called negative anima. But even then, the trickster is trying to help us. We mustn't see it as an opponent process. It's a complementary process to what we're doing that operates according to a natural perspective that it has towards the ego. The trickster is not the ego. It's something in and of itself. That's the best way to react to it. Neither through fear nor deference, but receptivity of a natural process. That way we don't identify with it and we don't run away from it. If we don't run away, it can deliver its message, we can receive it. Then you see homeostasis, as you say, it starts to act then, because all the configurations will rejig according to the position in real time that the ego is taking. That's incredibly effective because it is natural. When you asked me about hypnosis as well, didn't you, the other day, remember? There are aspects
I do.
There are aspects of that here about what hypnosis actually is. It's an altered state of consciousness. There is a field of altered state within which we can configure ourselves differently on the inside and the outside. depending upon what we're trying to achieve. But one of the things it should give us, if we utilize it properly, is ego strength. When we don't utilize ego strength, we become victim to dissociation, which is an altered state of consciousness. And that's what Pierre Janet observed when people became distressed and neurotic, is that there were altered states of consciousness, dissociation, fragmentation into subnuclei of consciousness, Jung's complexes. They're both right. The dealing with it, though, has to be as natural as the process which is operating outside of the ego to cause the neurosis in the first place. So we must learn to be receptive. And learning about hypnosis is the most efficient way of doing that.
Yeah, thank you. I'm looking forward to becoming better and better informed about it and better connected with the process. But what you're saying is really powerful, really good stuff. Yeah.
Thank you. So the two fundamental infodynamics, as we call them, and I know you know this, well, dissociation, which is the process of entering trance states, and then representation. And those three figures to that young man in that image are representations. Dissociation, representation. If we engage properly with both of those, then we are engaged properly with our own homeostasis, our own self-regulation. If not, then everything else that will at least try, on the negative side of the equation, to utilize those dynamics for themselves. So why don't we just use them to heal ourselves? Then the system becomes more efficient. Well, you okay? Do you want
to? I was just thinking the enemy really here is cognition.
Yeah.
It's the thing that gets in the way of us receiving time after time.
Yeah.
And you know, it's the stuff of complexes too. So we do have to get beyond being cognitive or overly analytical, which again is probably why these analytical methods don't work, that they just take us sideways rather than to where we need to be. So too much analysis, too much thinking, overthinking things, you know, which a lot of young men do, because a lot of young men are into philosophy, philosophical ideas. They feel elevated by them. And yet, as you say, when they engage in that way, they're still standing still.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I think cognition is the enemy. I mean, it would be even if you took an evolutionary perspective too, in terms of how the brain is developed, the neocortex is developed to adapt to an increasingly complex world. So we process so much through cognition, and we overvalue it and make it more important than it really is, and we miss out on all the other layers, on the things that it is actually based upon, whether it's, you know, and of course that will be represented differently according to you know, the position that we take on that, whether we look at it as being the different layers of the brain, or we think in terms of the various layers of the psyche going down into the ancestral psyche. You know, these are the places that we've become cut off from as a result of being just far too cognitive about the way that we live our lives. I suspect, isn't it?
Yeah, and what Steve also said, that even though we're trying, and you also, Pauline, mentioned how young men can feel elevated by the ideas.
Yes.
Even though we're reading stuff, I can say this from personal experience from an earlier part of my development.
Yeah.
When I was into those ideas and reading, I literally put forth a plan to read the entire bibliography of Nietzsche or whomever, and thinking that was going to solve some things or whatever. And as Steve rightly says, that what should we find that it should point us to complexes, because what is that is always seeking the same behavior, thinking that that's going to help us, but we're stuck, can only be complexes, because we are in place, even though we feel that we are progressing, or at least I did, I felt that I was progressing through each book, that my understanding was widening, that I'm more adapted, that I'm I mean, we can also bring in Adler here, that you're gaining status of some sort that will, when we bring into Freud, of course, bring you the sexual resources, so to say, in a very reduced language, but you know what I'm saying. So yeah, it all ties together, and in the end, it's of course complexes, because the pressure to actually individuate wasn't going away; it was just being reduced. Steve says that we feel as though we're the pressure of giving into complexes, even though we feel that we're stuck, is still less than actually defying them. So it was just as you mentioned, but of course it takes to really engage with your life, and then to perhaps understand from whence it came, that literally overnight it just the interest in it went away completely when you disidentify with it, when you understand that it got there by chance. It's not an integral part of flight. It came in by circumstances. Then it really, I never touched, didn't feel the need to engage. Like, I didn't have to say to myself, I will now cut it down to 10 pages, 5 pages per day, or whatever. It was just a natural process and a natural engagement that just cut it immediately, basically.
Oh, he's really understood.
Yes, you understood that perfectly. Yes.
The opportunistic nature of complexes. They're like that, like you say, it just happens, and suddenly we're in the field of influence of them, of these ideas. But then they start, once they're inside, to accrue other representations and associations to them. And what do the Jungians do? They encourage that.
They do.
And they can't see it. They can't see that that's fundamentally wrong. We don't collapse by refusing to laterally distribute. We actually expand in a different way. We expand associations on the inside that are natural, rather than acquire them through suggestion from the outside, and then set up a reciprocal internal system that correlates with the external suggestion on the inside, because that's the distributed field of the complex. And you've understood that perfectly. That's absolutely great.
Yeah, I think you're right to highlight the idea of the payoff as well, for being that way and being in that state, because it can feel too threatening to challenge the complex and to go beyond it. But that's where the real courage is, really, in this work, isn't it? And you've done that. That's quite clear, because you're talking from experience. That's how we know that you've done it, because you've described what you've experienced so perfectly, and also you've been able, as a result of that, to move away from things that presumably were harming you. You've moved on. You no longer feel the need to do that anymore, to steep yourself in philosophical ideas in an unhelpful way. So that's marvelous.
Definitely. It freed up a lot of libido to go into genuine things that were required of me in life at that time, and it was just a more healthy expression, and brought about a richer social life and everything that is just incomparable to the previous state. Even though it did have its strength, as you say, it can be hard to resist it, because they offer pseudo solutions to your problems. And when you bring in identification with it, maybe complexes, parental complexes, it can, from within, at least from the position of the ego, it can feel so hard to gain the courage to disidentify, to admit to yourself, basically, that is not a part of you. So from without, of course, especially when you get over it, it can feel easy to talk about it, to understand it, to understand the concept, to understand the symptoms that were around it, but from within, it can be or it was a great challenge. So disidentification and dissociation is the right path if done correctly. I'm not saying it was so easy for me because I wasn't knowledgeable in it, and I'm still learning a lot. But I did get through it. But I can completely see it now that if the right approach is done, it can be much less painful and much quicker to go through it. So yeah, there's a lot in there that can help a lot of people.